You're watching Euronews now. I'm Takumbo Silako with your top stories. The Ukrainian capital is today the center of diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the crisis with Russia as several European leaders meet President Volodymyr Zelensky for talks. A brief report with big conclusions. Pressure mounts on Boris Johnson to quit as UK Prime Minister after the Partygate inquiry says there was a lack of leadership. And Myanmar's military rulers extend the country's state of emergency a year after seizing power.
While Russia continues with its build-up of troops and military hardware near the border with Ukraine, President Joe Biden says whatever the outcome, the US is prepared.
Today in the United Nations, we've laid out the full nature of Russia's threat to Ukraine's sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine as we continue to urge diplomacy as the best way forward. But with Russia's continuing its buildup of its forces around Ukraine, we are ready no matter what happens.
We further urge.
Earlier, an emergency session of the UN Security Council had been a heated affair.
Recently, Russia has threatened to take military action should its demands not be met. If Russia further invades Ukraine, none of us will be able to say we didn't see it coming, and the consequences will be horrific.
The discussion about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You're almost calling for this. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen, as if you want to make your words become a reality. Away from the UN, and the flurry of diplomatic efforts continues, with the presidents of Russia and France holding their second phone call in 4 days. The pair are said to have been discussing legally binding security guarantees while promising more dialogue. More high-level diplomacy is expected this week. There are reports that Moscow has sent a written response to a US proposal, but so far such moves have failed to de-escalate the crisis.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is trying to rally support after the publication of a scathing interim report into rule-breaking COVID lockdown parties at number 10. Senior civil servant Sue Gray cites a failure of leadership and of judgment. The Metropolitan Police are investigating several parties, including one at the Prime Minister's personal flat. Gray's report has produced anger among some voters.
12 breaches that were illegal, plus lying to Parliament, I think. So I don't think many people would be impressed by what Boris Johnson said, whether you're a Conservative supporter or not.
I think he's not fit to be in Prime Minister. I think he should resign. I think he's revealing things that we know about him already. So there's no surprises.
Earlier, Johnson had apologised in the House of Commons.
I get it, and I will fix it. And I want to say, to the people of this country, I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted.
But the leader of the British Labour Party has accused Johnson of being shameless.
The British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame.
Johnson, who was not mentioned personally in Gray's report, is normally regarded by colleagues as an election winner. But this crisis could turn local elections in May into a challenge too far.
Today in the corridors of power here in London, members of Parliament from the ruling Conservative Party will be watching for emails, phone messages, any correspondence that they get from their constituents to see whether voters are willing to forgive Boris Johnson for the failures of leadership highlighted in a much anticipated report into social gatherings held in his Downing Street home and office during the coronavirus lockdowns. These MPs now have the choice whether to forgive or to forgo their Prime Minister. We've been waiting for many weeks for the conclusions of Sue Gray's report, but at the last minute she was muzzled, warned by the police that revealing too much could jeopardise their investigation into the same parties. So now we must wait longer for all the relevant facts. But we know that there is a criminal investigation taking place into some of those parties. The Prime Minister has faced calls to resign from opposition leaders and from his own side of Parliament. It was particularly stinging yesterday when his predecessor, Theresa May, asked whether Johnson had read the rules, whether he understood them or simply thought they didn't apply to him. And voters have been recounting the sacrifices they made at the same time, staying away from loved ones even on their deathbeds, while in Downing Street, suitcases full of wine were being drunk late into the night. Well, Johnson once again has asked for patience to allow the ever-extending investigative process to run its course. But some of his own MPs don't want to wait. The question is whether there are enough of them to trigger the process to remove him. And that is another investigation of their consciences, which is still underway. Ty again, Wright, Euronews in London.
Opponents of military rule in Myanmar on Tuesday marked the one-year anniversary of the army's seizure of power with a nationwide strike. New data points to increasingly violent and deadly clashes between the regime and armed civilian groups, which are pushing the country to the brink of civil war. After almost 1 year since the coup, in Myanmar we still have many people being killed every single day by the military, and the world isn't watching. The Military Council is still committing crimes against humanity, like arresting civilians, burning villages during the war with People's Defence Forces in ethnic areas. We're still facing torture, killing and oppression. What do we want? Democracy, chant protesters in Myanmar's second biggest city, Mandalay. They were defying threats from the authorities, who recently announced that the protesters could be charged with treason under an anti-terror law. Young people in Myanmar experienced a taste of freedom and technology in recent years, and we only want to follow this way. We don't want to jump down a dark hole again. If we're living under the Military Council, our souls will be dead. We won't have any opportunities, any chances in our lives. Almost 1,500 civilians have been killed and over 11,000 arrested in the ongoing crackdown, according to a local monitor, with rights groups accusing the regime of torture and extrajudicial killings. From today, Denmark is lifting coronavirus restrictions, including the COVID-19 pass for entry to public places. Despite record infections, authorities say Omicron was the game changer.
A very large fraction of the population is infected, and the range between the start of a peak and the peak is only 20 days. So the strategy now is to shield the vulnerable. We have to protect the vulnerable and avoid disruptions to the schools, the economies and the health system.
As with elsewhere in Europe, late-night entertainment venues in Denmark have paid a heavy price in the pandemic, and they say they'll now have to scramble to recruit staff. But at least for now, the country's returning to something like normal.
Much more to come on the programme. Do stay with us. We'll be back in a few moments.